Hi, good evening. Welcome to Neighborhood News. It's Tuesday night, 7 o'clock, and you probably noticed we got some different folks here. Carlos actually has a neighborhood meeting today, so he is attending to that. So I figured I'd bring on a co-hostess, I guess, to help me out. And this is my daughter, Nicole. So welcome, Nicole. Thanks for bailing me out when Carlos is not here.
You're welcome.
So basically, we don't have any real announcements now, but I can say that we're going to have a guest next week that's going to talk about things that were happening in our neighborhood. Pulaski Park got a new basketball court. It was resurfaced, and there are courts there. That's happened in the Father Kelly neighborhood, where they have got new playground equipment last year, and there were new basketball courts, and I believe there's a pavilion up there, and they fixed a lot of the sidewalks around there. So, so those are some things that are happening right now outside of all this craziness that's been happening. So, so in a couple weeks, Carlos will he'll be back with us next week. So we can go right to our guest, Nicole. And our guest is Gabe Andrade, who is a school committeeman. I was going to mess it up and say city councilor, school committeeman. Welcome, Gabe.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So there's been a lot of stuff. I know the school committee's kind of been somewhat out of the limelight over the last 2 or 3 weeks because of all the things with the city, but there is still stuff going on.
Actually, that can be a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is. You're right. Everybody's now watching the city council, but things are still happening, with the city. We had the beginning of the school year. I know we're already 2 months into it. We had, I guess, the results of some of the schools coming back and their levels changed, and now we have the Henry Lord online also. So has there been any? Everything's been going through, kind of seamless, right? Because it's it's something new, but there's always going to be different things going on.
Yes, and interestingly enough, with all the turmoil that's going on, I was actually asked a few weeks ago, I believe it was just before our last meeting, whether I felt that there would be any disruption, and I didn't think so. We had an agenda to follow, and I felt confident that we'd get through it, and we did.
Okay, good. So basically, right now, one of the things that are kind of hanging over the school committee, which is it's connected to the city, is that is it 3.1 or?
The latest I heard was a 3.1. It shifted back and forth, and I believe we're supposed to get the final figures from the state sometime next month.
Okay, so I know that has been somewhat controversial, and I know the city, I think it's 3.9 million they have, but they're trying to go in for a waiver.
Correct, and Kathy Ann Viveras had indicated this a number of times that she essentially was saying, let's go slow on giving this all this money to the school department because there are the needs for that, which I understand. You do need a reserve in case of emergencies, and I believe she had actually indicated a few other areas where some of that money would go. So we'll see how it comes down. Yeah,
but has there been any word on the waiver? I haven't read anything.
I've heard nothing. Since the initial talk about filing the waiver, I've heard nothing more.
Yeah, you know what I found interesting was with the waiver, I think Lynn, Massachusetts is another community that requested a waiver. But what I remember reading a couple months back with Lynn is that when all the folks were down on the border, the kids that were coming up from Central America, they would basically, if they had family members, they would send them there. And I think Lynn, I think they got like 500 or 600 kids added within this 1 year.
That they never expected.
Yeah, that they never. So I think that's where their problem is with the waiver, that they really need it because of now they're overwhelmed with the transportation and just. I'm sure they got to create new classrooms when you have 500 extra kids. So I think we're in a different predicament with that waiver.
Correct. I think certainly for Lynn, in a situation like that, they certainly have adequate justification for that waiver. I'm not sure whether our case will be as looked upon as kindly by the DESE.
Yeah, especially when they see we have 3.9 million extra, right?
Correct. And once again, I know when you have free cash, if you put it all in one place, it's you can find yourself shorted in other areas. So I certainly understand that.
Yeah. Well, as far as the money, Gabe, the 3.1 million, what can that, what would that be spent on? We hear that, and I've heard this from some people where, the school is not laying anybody off, so why should we why shouldn't we put this 3 million somewhere else? Because the school is not laying anybody off, the services are staying the same. But could you just let people know what?
We actually did vote on a use for those funds when when they did materialize. One of the things that you have to be careful about funds such as this is that they are one-time funds.
Okay.
We're not going to, assuming that we use it all this year, we're not going to have that next year because we will not have a deficit to make up. We'll be starting fresh. Any time that you get one-time funds, you've got to make sure that it's not built into something that's going to be in your budget year after year, because the following year you're not going to have that money. So you immediately have a deficit. You probably would have to, if for instance you put into personnel, you would most likely have to lay off most of those people the following year. Okay. So I know that one of the items that they were talking about was improving the I believe the wiring for computers at Henry Lord. So again, this is something that they would have to do once and once only. The following year, they would not need that money for that anymore.
So is the school department responsible for their own buildings, or is that on the city side?
I believe that's the maintenance is part of the school department's responsibility. There is a maintenance staff, along with custodial staff. There's also maintenance staff. They're painters, for instance, so that if things go wrong, obviously if it's something extraordinary, a boiler problem, a roofing problem, they would have to go out for that. But there is some money in the budget for those types of things.
So it makes sense that even if it is one-time money, a school like Henry Lord, that's, everybody thinks it's new, but it's probably, what, 20 years old, 25 years old?
I believe it does go back to the 80s, yes.
So
82, maybe.
Yeah. So we think it's new, but I mean, I'm sure there are things that can be done in a lot of these schools that are a little bit older than the newer ones that have come online in the last few years. So, all right, that's interesting then. But and I always get confused with this whole net school spending thing. And you're going to actually do me some justice today if you can explain it.
I certainly hope so. But the word deficit was used, and deficit is not as we usually understand the term deficit. Where we usually think of when we hear the word deficit is you didn't have enough money for all of your expenses, to cover all of your expenses. Well, this was not the case. The money was there, however, to pay for all the expenses. The problem is that the state requires that every community spend a certain minimum on education. Now that can be direct costs or indirect costs. The city actually funds some indirect costs, such as the insurance, for instance, the health insurance. So there is an absolute bottom line below which you're not supposed to go. And what happened last year was that there was one expense which does not count toward net school spending, transportation, which was, the bids came in way off the charts. I believe it was $1.5 million beyond.
Skyrocketed.
It was just much beyond, even if we could have anticipated, and I think we could have anticipated an increase, or should have anticipated an increase, but not $1.5 million more. I don't think anyone in his right mind would have figured that it would be that far over. Well, when that happened, we had to shift funds from areas that did count toward net school spending, like extra personnel, and move it into that account to cover the transportation costs. Another item that was a problem, that became a problem, was that there was an overestimate when the budget was built on the insurance costs. They actually overestimated, the city did, and when it fell short of that, they pulled money out of that account and put it elsewhere for city expenses. However, the insurance was a net school spending item. So whatever it was, it had been plugged into the budget. When money was pulled out of there because you didn't need it for that item anymore, then we were shorted in that area. Yeah. And there was a lot of wrangling in the spring and through the summer and early fall about just exactly what that item was, and what items actually counted toward net school spending and didn't. But apparently we're on the same page, and we definitely will be on the same page when the figures come in from the state.
Okay, so as far as the net school, I hear the term we're at 100% of net school spending. Correct. Or 2%. What does that formula exactly mean?
Well, that means you are exactly at net school spending, exactly what the state required, okay. And that's based on a per pupil cost.
Oh, okay.
If you are at 102%, you're actually contributing more than the minimum that you're required to contribute.
Okay. So it can fluctuate back and forth depending, like you said, on the students.
Well, right, but I believe it's set at a particular point in time. It okay. used to be years ago on October 1st, whatever number of students that you had on October 1st. Now, I don't know whether any adjustments are made currently, whether any adjustments are made for that afterward. But usually when you figure the budget is based on, actually it would be your
fully back in July.
Year.
Okay, yeah. All right. Yeah, no, I never really. So there's that formula because you hear that 1 or 2, and I know basically we get roughly what 125 million to 127 million.
Somewhere in that. Yeah. Well, no, not from the state.
For schools, I thought.
No, I don't, we usually get more like. The 127 million that you're thinking of is the total amount that goes into the budget, including state aid and the city contribution.
Okay.
The actual amount from the state, I can't remember exactly what it might have been, but it might have been high 80s or 90s.
Okay. So we spend probably maybe 40,000 from the city budget. You think roughly 40 or 50,000? I mean million. I'm sorry, million.
Probably pretty close to that, or maybe a little bit more. Yeah. Actually, you may have it about right.
Yeah. So I mean, basically.
And that counts indirect costs.
Indirect. Yeah. I'm just looking at it that we are, pretty much getting a subsidy for the school system.
We do, and it's a pretty hefty subsidy. But even so, the tax base is not high here, as it is not in comparable communities. And the tax rate is probably lower than, and in fact, I know it's lower than some comparable communities.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I found, and because I look at a lot of statistics at times, and a couple of years back, the school system had lost a lot of children, and I think it was probably back around 2008. I think they were down to like 9,000, but now I think you guys are back up to like close to 11,000 students, roughly?
Well, I know that the superintendent has indicated that we get approximately 100 or more, or there's been a trend over the past few years that we receive about 100 or more new students that we might not have expected every September, and they're usually people who've moved from other communities or whatever, but it has been I won't say it's a flood of new students, but it has been a slow increase.
Steady, yeah. So during the next census, then, if this continues, we know that we have to have added some people. If you've added,
most likely that's the trend, and it's usually at the lower grades.
Yeah. That's
the other interesting thing.
Okay. So the lower grade. I mean,
kindergarten. That's one of the reasons why you're going to find some of the kindergarten numbers are
high.
Very, very high.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be, but
they are. So if we're still adding them, whoever's leaving in middle and high school, the elementary is filling behind those kids.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even 4th and 5th grade, the numbers will get dramatically lower.
Right. So certainly
17 kids compared to 31, 32.
Well, in most cases, they're not quite that low. I think they have a few classes at Viveris that were that low. But most classes are not quite that low. there will be a drop-off from the early grades. The kindergarten, first and second, have been, the numbers have been too high.
Usually 25 to 31.
Yeah, mostly high 20s to 30, and occasionally above.
Yeah. No, it is interesting because when I went to Durfee back in the 80s, there were like 3,000 kids. And I think Durfee now has, what, 22,000, 2,300 roughly?
About that. It's the numbers have dropped off. Now, part of that includes, they don't count students who are in the resiliency as part of Durfee anymore.
Oh, okay.
So that accounts for part of those numbers, but not all of it.
Yeah.
The numbers have dropped off.
Yeah.
You're probably going to see also, maybe not so much this year, although you'll see a little bit this year, some numbers drop off because of the charter schools. The Argosy and also with
Atlantis, right? Well,
Atlantis having begun a high school portion.
Yeah, that's true. So do you know roughly how many kids are at the resiliency school? I was losing my thought for a minute. Probably 200 or 300, you think?
Maybe not quite that many.
Okay.
Probably under 2, but I'm not absolutely sure.
No, I just around. So you're right. I mean,
and they have a number of different programs there too. So who counts and who? I mean, they have your regular school, but then they have several different programs. Or the kid might show up in the afternoon, go to work during the morning, and
So yeah, no, that is interesting to see that it's kind of really high in the lower grades because those are the kids that are coming in.
That's what we found, and if we do get a report from the superintendent on a monthly basis of class sizes, and that's where we see the high numbers clustered in the lower grades.
Yeah. I think one thing that I've noticed, at least in the last, say, probably 8 years or 7 years since '08. Is the graduation rate, and I don't know, you worked for Durfee, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay. So I don't know if you were there in the 80s. I was at the beginning.
I definitely was.
Early 80s? All right, no problem.
I've been around for a while.
I graduated in '82, and you probably remember, I remember going into orientation, freshman orientation, and they would tell you, look to the right, look to the left, half of you won't be here. And
that's pretty close to accurate, too.
Yeah, it was. I remember them saying it, yeah. Where now it seems that we've gone from that 50 threshold up to around 73?
I believe somewhere in that vicinity. Now, I think that there's been attempts to try to keep people in school. The resiliency has tried to make school as attractive as possible.
Yeah.
I'll just say that much. But I think also historically you'll find that if the economy is terrible, kids are more likely to stay in school.
There's no jobs.
And the jobs, particularly for young kids, have really dried up. You may remember when you were in school, half the kids you knew probably had a job, maybe more.
Yeah.
And now those jobs are just not plentiful. And even after this recession is over, it may still be a poor economy for the young.
Yeah, it's really never, I think, changed. Even when I was in high school, I mean, when I graduated in '82, it was still tough to find a job. It was tough, but I don't know if it's because
now it's very good. And I think part of it is let's say at McDonald's, a lot of older workers who have had difficulty finding a job have moved on. Of course, the employer is going to take an older worker who's a bit more mature and considered a little bit more responsible, and the young student gets left out in the cold.
They're taking the jobs that were normally for college kids and high school kids.
Right.
So there's not that,
And that was the young person's first experience with a job and having to learn the responsibilities of being on a job. So it's a shame that that's gone. But
no, it is. But I still remember back then. I left here in '84, went into the military for 2 years, and it was, everybody said things were better here, but when you come back, I came back in '86. It really wasn't. I mean, you had more jobs that paid $10 an hour, or $8 an hour, but it wasn't, actually I shouldn't say that, $6 an hour is what I made back then when I came back. And I was a manager of a store, so that's how, you know, and then I started working for the government, I was making $6 an hour. So it's, it wasn't any better back then. I think things obviously were cheaper, but I don't think much has, you know, changed. I think we've always had that problem here, where I think it was probably better in a sense that if you went to college back then, you were almost guaranteed a job somewhere.
Right.
Where now that promise is not being held anymore.
No, it's not by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, I think he's referring to the whole mill situation. You know, when we had the mills, people could pretty much go get out of school, work in a mill, and guaranteed to have a job. That's what I think you're referring to, right? That you could go into the workforce. You didn't necessarily need a college degree or high school degree.
Right, and you might not have made tremendous money, but you made enough money to raise a family. Those jobs we just don't have anymore.
And I know Durfee has it does have a vocational section still, right?
Yes, it does.
Okay. What do they have in that section? I'm not putting you on the spot.
Let me think.
Do they have any nursing?
I know they have a daycare.
Yeah, they do have daycare. They have a nurse assistant program.
Hairdressing, right?
They have hairdressing. They have a restaurant, so they have a culinary section. They've lost some programs over the years, actually. Trying to think of what else.
Ones that probably went obsolete too.
Some, although some they probably would have kept. They had an appliance repair at one time. I'm not so sure they have it anymore.
Yeah, that sounds
I'm a
like
diamond
good
kid,
program.
so I don't know.
But they still do have some programs, and actually the nurse assistant is not a bad area for employment. You don't necessarily have to end up with a job as a nurse assistant, but it can branch off into other areas. That's probably one of the better ones. I'm not sure how many kids from the restaurant program, the culinary program, actually do end up with jobs in their field, but.
Well, if you could tell us too about, you know, we were talking about it earlier about the class size issue in the lower grades, and there has been some movement on that to kind of move that around.
We did make an attempt to improve that somewhat when we reopened the Henry Lord School. We looked at where we tried to get the most bang for the buck, and one of the things that we had hoped to be able to deal with in reopening the school was to try to reduce class size in some of the elementaries. And it turned out that the model that seemed to accomplish that better was the pre-K through 8 model. So that's why the committee went with that model. And it did help some of the schools in the South End, Viveris, the Green, Laterno, but the Green may be less than we had hoped, because one of the stipulations was that parents could opt to keep the child in the old school rather than moving him to new school. So, but eventually, I think it would work. But there's a lot more to be done.
You know, as far as when I was younger, went to Durfee here, we didn't have a bus system.
Correct.
We took the city bus.
Correct.
And I moved here from Taunton, but I had lived in New Bedford and Fairhaven before that in my younger years. And you know, the yellow school bus came, picked you up,
right? And
I moved to Fall River, and registered at Morton. And my mom was there. My brother went to the same school, to Morton, and they said, you need to buy a bus pass, and you need to get on a city bus. Right. And this was foreign to us, but it seems like now, since we've built these schools, is pretty much everybody getting transportation to school now, would you say?
No, there is a certain distance. You have to be, I believe, at least a mile from the school in order to be able to get transportation.
It's like a mile to a mile and a half.
So and a mile and a half maybe for the older students. Definitely middle school students, I believe.
Yeah.
Elementary, I believe, is a mile. But actually, believe it or not, the greatest expense in transportation monies go to special needs students. It's not your average student who happens to live out of the district or a little bit out of the district. It's the bulk of it is for special needs. Also, interestingly enough, at Durfee, they still have the city buses picking up the kids, but I believe money actually has been put into the budget to give kids some of the passes. Now, I don't know whether probably not all get it, probably by free lunch and.
I heard, I know that they said the dropout rate is higher in the deep south end because of Durfee being.
That's no surprise.
Yeah,
and interestingly enough, when the high school was downtown, we didn't have as much of a transportation problem because it was relatively centrally located.
Yeah. You just wonder what's changed because I mean we had a high dropout rate in the 80s, but. I never heard anybody saying it was because I can't get to school. Everybody had a bus pass. Right. They just didn't want to go to school most of the time.
Well, there's still kids who don't like to go to school now.
So yeah, I guess it's. So as far as in the last 20 years, are there more special needs students in the school system than years ago? Is that what's changed? You think?
I would say definitely not less. Okay. There was a time. I guess the state frowns upon too high a percentage of special needs students, and we're probably up around over 20% right now. Mm-hmm. And I remember even back when I was working, we were usually right around that number also. So there may or may not be more, but they're certainly not less.
Yes. Okay. So what do other communities do then? If is there a set number that you have to have, or like you said, there's a set number, you can't go past that number?
Well, it's not necessarily a hard and fast, but when you hit a particular percentage, the state kind of frowns upon it because this costs more money.
No, okay, so they have to go into another school then.
And not everyone who applies for special needs to get into a special needs program, actually, I mean, sometimes you can work things out where they don't need it. Yeah. Sometimes parents will want the special needs designation for reasons that may not be the best.
Legitimate.
But I think there's certainly enough needy kids that those numbers are always going to be pretty high.
Yeah, it's just like years ago, you never really heard. When you see the commercials about autism, you never really heard about that years ago.
Yeah, and you wonder whether that was because people didn't understand, and so it wasn't diagnosed, whether it was always there, or has it just mushroomed.
Yeah. Well, Gabe, it was quick. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yep. Well, my pleasure.
Yep. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you.